Hey guys, I'm Eric.
And I'm Dan.
And you are on the 815 LSx Talk podcast. Alright, welcome back. This is episode 2 of the 815 LSx Talk podcast. Today we got a good episode for you guys. We're going to talk about some of the new things that 815 LSx Swaps has going on. And both Dan and I created a list of all of the vehicles that we have previously owned. So we'll talk a little bit about those, which ones we liked and wish we kept, which ones we hated and couldn't get rid of quick enough. And then if you guys know me personally, you know I'm cheap. So we'll talk about what the most expensive vehicle I ever bought was and what the cheapest ones were. So Dan, you want to tell them a little bit about the new, I guess we'll call it series for a lack of a better word, that we have going on YouTube?
Yep. So we already kicked off a couple weeks ago the 815 tuning series. And what we're going to do is go over the way I'm learning to tune. So I've just been dabbling around with HP tuners for a little bit now, and I've gotten to the point where I can somewhat get the car running well enough. The BMW with the twin turbo build, now that it's finished, I do need to be able to get it drivable prior to taking it to a tuner, because the more time they have to spend on it, the more money it's going to cost me. So I've been playing around with how to modify the VE table and how to pull in some information from doing just driving tunes. And I decided to put that into a series. And so the first one we have out so far goes over how to build the data logs, how to build out the histograms, and how to set up your HP tuners to be able to pull in that information and be able to make a tune file out of that. And then the next one, we're actually going to be taking it out, driving the car, pulling in the data, and then applying it to the VE table, and then see how that reacts to those changes. We'll just keep trying to make more videos on that, or what some people request they want to see. If I don't know, I'll look into it and try to find out as much information about it as possible and make a video on it.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really good series. For me personally, I don't know too much about HP tuners yet. So as this goes along, I'm hoping to learn as well. And once I finish this last semester that I'm in with school, then I'm hoping to have a little more time to actually dig in and learn all the ins and outs of HP tuners.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn on there. So, I'm still learning myself, and hopefully me trying to teach other people actually helps me have a better understanding of it. So it'll help me learn too.
So if you guys want to check that out, head over to the 815 LSx Swaps YouTube page and go ahead and look at that series. There'll be a playlist, and the first video is live. So the other thing that we've got going on is you started building a website for us, right?
That's correct. I used to do some web design back in my younger days, and it's not something that I really got too headstrong into, but I know enough to be dangerous on there. So playing around and trying to remember how to do it and get us a website put up. So it is already somewhat live, but it's just a placeholder at the moment. And we got 815lsx.com, and it should be ready for traffic in a couple weeks.
Yeah, and that's going to be cool. We're going to do some build lists on the cars that we currently have. So you'll be able to click on each one of our projects, and we're going to go through and put some pictures and some verbiage in on what's done to the cars, maybe like a mod list, maybe some pictures of actually going through the build. So that's going to be pretty cool. There will be links to our merchandise store once we get that up and going. We do have that already put together, but it's not live yet. We have a big cartel store. Stickers are going to be on there soon. And then we're not sure. We'll see what else we do with the website. We'll link some of our YouTube videos in there. We might do like a feature for other vehicles. So maybe we go to a car show and we post up some pictures from the car show. Maybe we do an interview with somebody, talk about their car, put some pictures of their car. So I think it'll be pretty cool. It'll open up a lot of new things for us to do. So jumping into the cars that we previously owned, how many have you had?
So from what I can remember, that I got about 15 cars that I've had since I was about of driving age.
So I went through mine, and it looks like I have 23 cars that
Jeez.
I've owned, and then I've also done some circle track racing, so I had another 11 there, and then I've had 4 motorcycles as well.
Ooh.
So what was your very first car?
So my very first car, didn't have it very long, but it was a 1987 Plymouth Reliant K car. So I mean, it was just a hunk of crap, and I only had it for maybe about a month before I got broadsided in an intersection and totaled it out. So I mean, it was strong. It held up to the accident fairly well, and I walked away from it.
So my first car was a 1986 Ford Mustang Fox body, which ironically enough, I'm back in another Fox body today. But I got mine when I was 13, which is almost unheard of nowadays. But I grew up always around cars, and my parents had found a deal for this car. It had been in an accident, and I don't remember exactly, but I think it was only like $150 they paid for it.
Jeez.
And my grandpa had a motorcycle shop. He had an area where I could keep it, so I left it there. And over the next 3 years until I got my license, I did different side jobs. The apartments that we lived in, I painted the entire exterior of the 3 buildings, made some money, and bought a front end for it. I think it needed 2 windows, but basically I just saved up money and put it together, and then by the time I turned 16, I had a car that I was ready to drive. So I drove that car through first couple years of high school. Funny story there is that car actually caught on fire in my high school parking lot.
And it had absolutely nothing to do with the work you did on it?
I don't believe so. From what I remember, the people that told me said that I pulled in and I was running frantically around, which I believe, because imagine being on your way to high school and your car catches on fire in the parking lot. But from what I remember, it was an electrical issue that had sparked some maybe leaking oil. I can't remember exactly, but it was nothing crazy. They came out and they hit it with the fire extinguisher. I got it towed home, and within a couple days it was running and driving again just fine. But it's still a story that anybody that knows me from high school definitely remembers. So I drove that, and then it was my junior or senior year of high school, the Fast and the Furious came out. So as everybody knows, that was the big thing at that time, and I went and bought a 1995 Honda Civic. So it was a newer car. I don't have the exact price, but I think it was around like $3,700. Had lowish miles, didn't have a lot of rust or anything, and it was a manual. So I went and bought it, and I was so excited to get it. I got there and realized I didn't know how to drive a manual yet. If you're familiar with where we're at, not too far from us, there used to be a Anderson dealership right on like Harlem and Alpine. And I got it there, and I was pulling out of the parking lot, going across Alpine, and I killed it. And I'm blocking traffic, and I have no idea how to get the car going. I pretty much froze up, and I didn't have a choice. I had to figure it out because I was there and I was blocking traffic and people were getting mad. So I figured it out, got it going, got down the road, and then just spent a lot of time driving back roads until I figured out what I was doing with that.
Let's just do a neutral drop. You throw it in gear, or you pop it in neutral, and just go ahead and just drop that clutch line out first, and you'll be going. That's how I took off the first time I had to.
I remember using the emergency brake all the time to keep the car from rolling backwards as I would take off in first gear. But funny thing is I drove it and I shift 1, 2, 3, 4, no problem. And every time I tried to shift into fifth gear, the RPMs would rev up. And I thought there was something wrong with fifth gear. Well, come to find out, I was actually downshifting from fourth back into third. And at the time, I didn't realize when you go from fourth to fifth, you have to go up to neutral, over to the right, and then up to fifth. So I was kind of taking that diagonal path, and it was just going back into third gear instead of fifth gear.
That was race mode.
So I had that, and that was when I really started getting into modifying cars. This was the first car that I started modifying. Again, Fast and the Furious, that was what was popular. So body kits, big spoilers, Lambo doors, carbon fiber hood, neon lights, all that stuff. So had that for a long time. I actually had that car for, gosh, it had to have been 12 plus years, but towards the end of owning it, I was living in this neighborhood and I never really drove it. It was unpainted. I had it primered because I did all this body work to it, and I said that I wasn't going to drive it until I got it painted, and really it just sat for a long time and never got it painted. So I ended up selling that to a coworker of mine, and I was going to get out of cars, and I was going to get into like boating or something, because at the time, another one of my vehicles, which is actually the most expensive vehicle that I've ever bought, was a 1993 Chevy Silverado. So this was the most expensive vehicle still today at $7,500.
Ooh, so brand new, right?
It actually was extremely nice. It had a 2-inch body lift, had 33s on it, had a metal cowl hood, had a crate engine dropped in it, had a rebuilt trans and rebuilt rear end. So it was an extremely nice truck, but I never drove it in the wintertime. So it was just another vehicle that I had. So at the time I had that and the Honda, which I didn't drive in the winter. So now I had two vehicles that sat in the garage all winter. So after I sold the Civic, I was going to get out of cars, figured I'd get a boat or something different, and then I came across the 240, and I talked to that guy, and he was asking more than what I wanted to pay for it, and I just shot him a message and said, hey, I'll offer you this much money, and I can come tomorrow. This was on like a Friday night. And he says that he was getting ready to ship the car. He had it sold and he was going to ship it. And I basically talked him out of shipping the car because I was local. And we made an agreement. He kept some number of parts off the car to get the price down to what I wanted to pay. And I went up that next morning and ended up buying it. So with those, I had the truck, I had the Civic. So I still needed basically a daily driver. So I've had a number of different daily drivers during that time. I had a Geo Metro, which was a manual 3-cylinder, which was extremely fun. We did a lot of dumb stuff with that car. I also had an 86 BMW 318i, which I'm sure, Dan, you probably love to hear that.
Oh, yeah. Gotta show some love for the BMWs here.
That car was a train wreck, actually. So
it was a BMW, so yeah.
You got to imagine I'm probably 18, 19 at the time, and I see this BMW for sale, and it was in my price range. I can't remember exactly what the price was now, and I needed a winter car. So it's middle of the night, it's dark out. I meet the guy, I look at the car. I can't see a lot of this car. It's nighttime. But it was a BMW, and I'm a young kid, and I thought, yeah, I'm going to have a BMW. So I bought it. Took it home, and the next morning I got up, and the body was okay. It was a little bit rough, but the heater didn't work. So this is my winter vehicle with a heater that doesn't work. So those were the cars that I had throughout high school. Once I got out of high school, I had some different cars on and off. I had a few different neons that I got cheap. And then one of my buddies was selling his neon, and at the time that was the newest car that I had bought. So wife was pregnant with our youngest son, and together we both had two vehicles that combined had over 400,000 miles on them. So one of them was a 98 Neon, and it had 220,000 miles on it. I got that from a buddy of mine who wrecked it and just wanted to get rid of it. It was sitting in his backyard. The window was down and it sat there all summer, rained inside the car. So I ended up getting it, stripping the interior out, letting everything dry, and realizing it was still a decent car. So fixed a couple things on it and drove it for quite a few years. And at the time, she had a Toyota Corolla, which also had like 200 and some thousand miles. So I ended up buying a 2004 Neon from a buddy of mine, and I think at this time it was probably only about 2007. So that would have been the newest vehicle I had bought at the time. And that again was another manual car, and I had that for quite a few years as well. So what's a couple of the other vehicles that you have owned?
So after trashing the Reliant, I mean, it's probably best for it anyways. I mean, I wasn't getting any dates with that car, so I ended up picking up a 94 Ford Taurus. Now, funny about the dates though. So that car had a host of its own little issues. It looked nice. It ran good. But I do remember one time, I was actually out on a first date with a girl, and we came out of the movies, and I'm trying to start the car, and the ignition switch just falls out of the column. So then after getting that all figured out, then the battery dies, and then it kept snowballing from there. And needless to say, it was the last date I went on with her. Ended up getting that one fixed up a little bit, and my parents had a 89 Olds Delta 88 Royale, old boat, just big tank-like cars, and like a sofa on wheels, really nice. I liked it. I don't know why, but probably the 3800 V6 that was in there. Those things just bulletproof motors, and they would just run forever. So I actually traded my dad for the Taurus for the Olds, and I drove that one for quite a few years before the trans cracked on there. I don't know how that happened. I mean, who knows? I never hot rod cars.
Never took that Delta 88 out street racing?
Oh, no, absolutely not. Only maybe on the streets of Mexico. I actually picked up an 84 Pontiac Firebird from my buddy's grandpa. And the plan was to pull the crappy V6 out of there and put a 350 in there. It was actually be the first car I ever would do an engine swap to. And unfortunately, I just never had the time to do that or the place to do that. I was trying to set up get a place set up to actually pull the motor out and swap it. I had another one lined up, but winter was coming around, and I ended up having to put it in storage. It ended up sitting in storage so long that I started racking up a lot of bills on that I ended up just giving it to a friend of my dad, and he ended up doing the engine swap on it and selling it off. So it was one of those, I really wanted that car. I really would have liked to have it. It was one of my favorite cars back in the day, and I would have loved to have that as a daily driver, but ended up just having to let it go.
I actually also had a Firebird. It was a 1990 Pontiac Firebird, and it had a 305 in it. And at the time, I wanted to build a drag car out of it. The only thing I ended up ever doing with that car was a burnout in my driveway, which I found out the car had no brakes.
Oh, that's the best time to find out, too.
That was literally the only thing I ever did with that car. It sat, and then I ended up trading that for a 1965 Oldsmobile Cutlass Convertible.
Ooh.
So talking about tanks, this was a huge car, and my only plan with that was I wanted the motor out of it because I have done a bunch of circle track racing, and I was building what they call a Roadrunner, not the Plymouth Roadrunner, but it was a class of race cars at our local speedway. So I bought the car, or actually I traded the Firebird Trans Am for the Cutlass Convertible, pulled the motor out, and actually left the car at the guy's house and sold the chassis to somebody else I worked with, and kept that motor and put it in, I don't remember what the car was. It was a big four-door, might have been like Monte Carlo or something. I can't remember exactly.
Well, after the Olds decided to that the transmission wanted to part ways, ended up trashing that one out and had some guy come pick it up and just part it out for me. Ended up getting a 92 Dodge Daytona given to me from my dad. And this is about the time I moved out on my own. I was looking for another car, and he's like, here, have this one. I'd already been driving it for a little while, and he just decided to just give it to me. And the funny thing about that car was, out of a lot of the cars I've owned, that was one of my favorite. And it wasn't really all that great, but I just really liked the car for some reason. I think it was just the way it felt when I was driving it. It was just, I liked the looks of it. I liked the way it felt. It had kind of a lethargic, 3-liter Chrysler engine in there. And one of the reasons I got it was because the trans was already starting to decline its health. So one of the things, if I would, I would like to find one of those cars again today. And it's kind of on my bucket list to find one and then rear wheel drive swap it. And some people have done it, but they usually do it to the a little bit older ones with the flip up headlights. And I really wasn't all over about those. I really didn't care for them too much, but I would really love to find the 91, 92 model range where they got rid of the flip ups and do a complete rear wheel drive swap. And I mean, if I could find one now, that would probably be what I would do with the C6 Corvette parts we got, and just do a complete transaxle rear end on that and put an LS in there, maybe one big fat turbo on it, and just send that thing.
I actually have a guy that I used to work with who is no longer at my company anymore, but still can communicate with him through Facebook. He actually had about at least 4 or 5 of those, so maybe I'll reach out to him and see what he's still got. I don't know if he has them or not, but definitely worth reaching out if that's something you want to look at.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I just looked a couple days ago when I was making this list, and I cannot for the life of me, through looking through the entire US, find one of the earlier 90s models where they went to the non-flip up headlights. Cannot find any for sale anywhere. I mean, they are just a rare commodity, and I have found a few like late 80s for sale, and I'm seeing them go for over 10 grand.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
Oh yeah.
So a couple other cars that I had were just ones that I didn't keep very long. I had a 94 Honda Civic hatchback. I also had a Mazda RX-7, 1984 Mazda RX-7. So this was one of my wife's coworkers, I believe, or her boss at the time. He had this, and all I knew about it, she came home and said, he's got this car, it's a Mazda, and it has the number 7 in it. That's all she could tell me. So I instantly knew what it was. I didn't know what year, body style, but she said he's only asking $250 for it. So instantly, being the cheap car guy that I am, I had to go see it. So got a hold of the guy, went over and looked at it, and I pull up. It's a 1984 RX-7, 77,000 original miles on it, next to no rust on it. There was a dent in the driver's side door that was keeping the door, like the latch from opening, so you had to climb in through the passenger side. It was a manual trans, but bought it for $250. He said the clutch was going out in it. To me, it was the middle of winter, and just those old cars and those older clutches, they don't like to be jumped in and drove, so had to let the car warm up. And so I bought that, had a little bit of fun with it, and then I got it titled, and before the plates had come back in the mail, which is maybe a month or so, I turned around and flipped it and sold it for like $2 grand.
Start seeing a reoccurring theme here.
What's that?
It seemed like a used car dealership over here.
Well, speaking of that, another car that I didn't have for very long was a 1990 Volkswagen Corrado.
Ooh.
So that was kind of a cool car. It was another thing where somebody at my work was selling it, needed some work, but it was supercharged. I don't know if you remember those, but those were supercharged. So got it, trailed it home, did a little bit of work on it. It had some issues. I think the supercharger was actually blown on it, so I didn't have it very long. I got it run in, drove it around this neighborhood actually a couple times, and ended up selling it, I think, for maybe $1,200 or something. I didn't have a whole lot into it, but just ended up flipping it and selling it.
Yeah, I think they're gonna want you to get your used car salesman license soon here.
I should get one. I've looked at it before. It'd be, I think they're like $1,000. I'm not sure, but it'd be worth looking at one day.
I'll be able to hit the auto auction then.
Yeah, especially if we can find a shop one of these days.
That'd be nice.
So some of the other cars here that are on my list are another 240SX, which I actually got from Corey at Twisted Tech. This had no motor in it. I actually just bought it because it had 5-lug on it, so I did the 5-lug conversion over to my 240SX and took the wheels off of it and then sold that one. I've also got another Mustang, so when I started building this Mustang, I was looking for parts, and I found a guy that had one in Wisconsin, and it was just a chassis, just like how I got mine. No suspension, no nothing. And he said it was free. He said, come get it, had a title and everything. So I told him I'd give him a case of beer if he kept it overnight so that I could come in the morning, and he did. And I went up there and got that, brought that home, took the parts off of it I needed for my Mustang, and then parted out most of the rest of the car. And then that leads me up to 1970 Plymouth Satellite. So this I actually got just before I bought the Mustang. I got this from, again, somebody at work. And I was going to build this car, and I got it home, got it cleaned up, and just realized it was in a lot worse condition than what I originally thought. And it was going to be a lot of work to fix up and build. So I ended up selling that to another friend of mine who still has it. Hopefully he can finish it up and I can go back and check it out sometime. So what's next on your list?
All right, so after the Daytona started having its health decline of its transmission, which was, on its way anyways, I ended up picking up a 95 Chrysler LeBaron GTC, which is the Gran Turismo convertible from a buddy of mine. Because, I was a glutton for punishment, and I just got rid of a 3-liter Chrysler for a 3-liter Chrysler with the same transmission. So we all know how this story is going to end on that one, but that one we did actually have for a couple of years. I was driving it when I got rid of the Daytona, and then shortly after, I ended up inheriting a 94 Jeep Grand Cherokee Limited from my brother because he was having some issues with it where the front pinion gear was starting to go out, because these things are all-time 4-wheel drive and kind of notorious for the front pinion gear in the front diff wasn't strong enough to be used all the time, and the repeated use of it all the time over a long period of time started stripping the teeth out of this. So it was a lot more money than he wanted to put into it, and he had it for some odd years, so he asked me if I wanted it. He said, if you fix it, you can have it. So I just went and picked it up. I got it going, and I gave the LeBaron to my wife, so that was her daily driver after that. Drove the Jeep for about, I think it was a year or so before, I actually only had it for maybe less than a month before the front pinion gear finally decided to just exit the building. It was fine. It drove fine, but as soon as you started trying to take off at low speeds, at a high load, you'd hear it popping up in the front real bad. And then finally, it just gave out. The teeth exited, and it felt a lot faster. I must say, it felt like it freed up, and pretty much because it just went all-time rear-wheel drive. So we ended up parking it, pulled the front diff cover off, and saw that there was just practically no teeth left to it. And all I did, because I was told that even if I replaced that pinion gear, it was just going to happen again, and they're just notorious for going out. So I said, screw it. I just pulled the pinion wheel off the diff and put the diff back together. So I had all-time rear-wheel drive, and I must say that it had the V8, the 318 V8 in there, and that thing put some torque down. I was able to just light those tires up all the time, and that was my first reckless driving ticket.
Sounds like a good story here.
Oh yeah. And then that one started, because there's some issues with the transfer case on those if you're not locking front and rear diffs together. and it doesn't like it, and it starts causing issues with the transmission. And about a year after running it like that, it didn't like it enough that it finally took a toll on the trans. It was a free truck for me at that point, and I ended up just parting it out and taking it to the local junkyard. So I made actually quite a bit of money after on the part out of that one.
That's not too bad. So whatever happened with the LeBaron?
Well, that one actually, it lasted for a few years, and even through that one while the wife was driving it, I had the Jeep, and then I actually went and picked up a new car to replace the Jeep when that one finally went out. And that was a car I always kind of wanted, and it was the first time I found one for sale that was within a decent price range. And it was a 94 Ford Taurus SHO. And if anybody knows anything about the SHOs, they're more Yamaha racing engine than they are Ford. So the older SHOs came with a 200 cubic inch V6 that put about 220 horsepower down. They were some beastly cars, and they were really cool. And I really wanted one, and I finally found one. It was a fun car. It ran really good, and the guy wasn't asking very much. I think I paid like $2,000 for the thing out the door. And that one, it lasted me for a few years, and it was a blast to drive.
Yeah, those were kind of a sleeper back in the day.
Oh yeah, it was definitely a sleep. I took on a couple BMWs and roasted them with that thing. I mean, I drove very safely and nicely in the car until I went to Mexico and beat a few cars.
Yeah, Mexico. That's where all the street racing goes down. But yeah, you got the creature comforts with the car, but you also got a little bit of pep with those.
Oh yeah, I mean they put some power down. I surprised a few people when that thing pulled off on them. Took them to Applebee's.
Nice. So the last car on my list is the car that we just recently picked up that you can see in a YouTube video. It is the Infiniti G35. So this is going to be our death cart build. So that's the most recent car that I have purchased. Jumping down, I separated mine out, so I have a list of trucks that I owned as well. We already covered the 93 Silverado, which was the most expensive one that I bought, $7,500. Also, I had a 1946 Dodge pickup. So at the time, I wanted to build a rat rod, and I still do. That's something I still want to build. But at the time I got this, it was for sale, and it was in a guy's field, and went out and picked it up. He had a tow truck on his property, so he had to lift it basically out of the ground and put it up on my trailer, and brought it home, unloaded it, bought some wheel dollies so that I could roll it around in my garage, cleaned it up a little bit, kind of inventoried everything that I had, and that was about where that one ended. So that was right before I moved into this neighborhood that we're at now, and I just didn't have the room for it. So I had the 93 Silverado, I had the Civic, and I had the Neon. So at the time, I was living in a really small house where I think the garage was bigger than the house, but I was able to fit that truck, the Silverado, and the Neon all in the garage. And I think it was only listed as like a 2.5 car garage.
Well, all honesty, you only had 2.5 cars in there.
That's true. But moving to this neighborhood, I didn't have a place for it, and I didn't want to move into the neighborhood and have this 1946 patina truck just sitting outside, so I went ahead and sold it. But that will be something that I do end up building eventually. I do want to build a rat rod pickup.
It wouldn't be a bad thing to have. I like the idea of that.
And then to round out the list of trucks I've had, I had a 98 Dodge Ram that I bought just to do the trailer race at our local racetrack. If anybody's ever done that before or heard of it, it is probably one of the most fun things that I have ever done. Basically, you take some vehicle and some trailer, hook them together, and the whole intention is to go out and wreck the other person's trailer. Absolute blast.
Sounds like it.
I had already done it 2 times before in a Dodge Caravan, and it was fun. So I got this Dodge truck, and it didn't have a title, and we were in this neighborhood, and it was just sitting in the driveway, and somebody had called about it, and I didn't have the title. So I ended up just having to get rid of it because I didn't have a place to keep it at the time. Then I also had a 98 Ford F-150. So the story on how I got that is prior to that, I had bought a Honda 400EX ATV. So I bought that, I think right out of high school. And a buddy of mine, we always went trail riding. And it was fun. Ripped it for quite a while. I think I spent $1,400 on it. He had property up in Wisconsin, so we'd drive up there, unload at his property, ride to the trails, and then just ride all day. And then eventually I ended up trading that for a motorcycle, which would have been my first motorcycle. So I traded that for I think it was a 92 Suzuki Katana 600.
Ooh.
Fancy.
Yeah, oh yeah.
What I didn't know is, one, that I didn't know how to ride a motorcycle, but that was easy to learn. Two, it didn't have a second gear.
I just jumped to third.
So it seemed like that somebody was really rough on it on that 1-2 shift, and I think it just bent the shift forks. So exactly what you said, I had that for probably 5 or 6 years, and I just rode it first to third, and it rode absolutely fine. It was a fun bike. It was easy to learn how to ride on. At the time, I just rode around my neighborhood a few times and then went and got my permit and started riding it back and forth to work.
Yeah, that's about how mine went with my first bike too.
So then at some point I decided I wanted to get rid of the Katana, and I traded that for the 98 F-150. You can see a trend here. I like to trade. I like to flip. But traded for this truck. I wanted to have a truck again. I hadn't had a truck in a while. I also had the 04 Neon at this time, and it was starting to kind of fall apart. So I knew I wanted a truck as my next vehicle again because I missed having one. So traded for that, and it was rough. I'm not gonna lie. It was the work truck edition. It had the rubber floors, a lot of rust, a lot of dents, and then maybe a year into having it, the head gasket blew, and I did what any cheap car guy would do, and I poured in some head gasket repair.
Oh yeah, I remember that stuff.
And surprisingly, it actually did fine. It held together, heat still worked and everything. Just every winter I had to pour a new bottle in, but again, it was a really cheap truck, and I don't drive far for work, so it actually worked fine. So then I traded that truck for a 250 Kawasaki Ninja. And I rode that around the neighborhood a little bit. That was rough as well. It had been dropped and it had been beat up, and it looked like somebody tried to do a stunt bike with it. But my thought was, I'll take the motor off of that and build a go-kart or something with it. And I had that for about a year, and I got bored with that, and I didn't tear it apart because it ran. So I just put it up for sale, and I traded that for a turbo kit. And I had that turbo kit for a while. Won't go into too much detail on that, but I ended up selling that and then buying the twin turbos for the Mustang. So rounding out the rest of the list of trucks, I had the 98 F-150, I had the 98 Dodge Ram, and then the last one is my current truck, which is the 07 Silverado, which has an interesting story on how I got that as well.
Yeah, how did you get that?
So once again, another vehicle that was for sale at my work, and the owner said that the motor needed to be replaced. His truck looked like it was in extremely nice condition. He was asking $2,000 for it, and me being the LS guy, I had 2 or 3 LSs sitting around at the time, and I figured, worst case, I'll drop one of my LSs in it. So I messaged the guy, told him I'd buy it. There was somebody ahead of me that was already looking at buying it, but apparently that guy was trying to buy it for somebody else. So the guy said, I'd rather keep it with somebody that works here, and so he sold it to me. So I went and looked at it, and I emailed him on and off the rest of that day, and he told me that it started running rough, and he took it to the mechanic. The mechanic said it had a broken camshaft, which I personally have never heard of a broken camshaft.
No, I remember when you told me what it was doing, and I said I would buy it because I knew exactly what was wrong with it, because it's a very common problem with those trucks. I don't know how that mechanic misdiagnosed that.
Well, and in all honesty, everything I read is when that normally happens. So for people that don't know what happened, it had a collapsed lifter. So these had the DOD, or displacement on demand engines, to where once you got up to a certain speed, it would kick from 8 cylinders down to 4 cylinders. Well, one of those lifters collapsed, and usually when that happens, it does destroy the cam, does all kinds of damage. But the guy said as soon as it started happening, he drove it directly to the mechanic. So I figured it couldn't have been too bad. I went and met him at the mechanic shop where I bought it from, and it started up. He gave me the keys, it started up, and I was kind of blown away because I wasn't expecting it to start. He said it needed a motor. So I called a flatbed and had them come pick it up because I didn't want to risk driving it. And they came and put it on the flatbed, and they go, "You know what's wrong with this, don't you?" And I said, "Yep." And he goes, "It's going to need a new engine." I said, "Well, we'll see. I'm going to look at it first." So brought it home and tore it apart and cranked it over by hand, and I couldn't find any lifters sticking. So I put it back together, started it up, same thing. So then I took the valve cover off again, but this time started it up and let it run, and then I could see one of the lifters was sticking. So all I did to fix it was did an oil change, did an engine flush, and put some oil conditioner into the engine, let it run, it freed up that lifter, and then I bought HP tuners, which is when I originally got it, went into HP tuners and disabled the DOD, or displacement on demand, and put a bushing down in the valley cover, which blocks oil from going to those lifters, which is how they collapse. And I've been driving that truck now for a little over a year and have had zero issues with that since.
You've even taken some road trips with it too, haven't you?
Yeah, right after I got it, we had to take a trip to Michigan, which was a 5-hour drive, and I was pretty nervous because I didn't know if it was going to make it, but it went flawlessly. So it's been a very good truck, and unfortunately the owner wasn't mechanically inclined. So once I told him what I did, he was a little bit upset, but more upset with the mechanic than he was with me. And he kind of said, you know, the truck's got 200,000 miles on it. Even if I had them replace the engine, now I've got a truck with a new engine and 200,000 miles on a trade-in. So he was just glad to see that it went to somebody who was able to fix it and keep driving it.
In all honesty, that is a 4L60, so it's probably not long for this planet either.
Depends how much towing and beating on it I do, which I actually am fairly gentle on my dailies because I'm cheap and I don't want to buy another daily. I haven't had a car payment in quite a while, so I'd like to keep it that way.
Yeah, that makes one of us here then.
So where are you at on your list? What you got?
All right, so we left off with having the Taurus SHO and the LeBaron. So the SHO was my daily driver. The LeBaron was the wife's. And as I said before, with the transmissions on those Chryslers, it started to go. And we just didn't want to have it when it went out. So we decided to preemptively get rid of it. Ended up selling it off to a buddy who wanted to just drive it until it died, just because he needed a winter driver. And he drove it until the transmission went out on it. So we sold that one to him, gave it to him real cheap. Ended up picking up a 99 Monte Carlo for my wife to drive as a daily. And the reason I got that one is I got it, I think I paid like $1,500 for it. And that's because it was my mom's car and she had been driving that for a while and just traded that one, or went and bought a 04 Monte Carlo because she wanted the newer body style. And so she sold that one to me pretty cheap, and that became my wife's daily driver. And she drove that, and I drove the Taurus for a while, and then she became a housewife. So when she was pregnant with our first, she was on bed rest for a while, so I had to stop working. And I ended up getting a really good job, but I had to drive for the job. It was about a 45-minute commute every day. And the Taurus was older and not in the absolute best condition, something that I wouldn't drive on, the interstate for 45 minutes a day. So we didn't need 2 cars at the time, especially with her not working. So I ended up using the Monte Carlo as my daily to, drive back and forth to almost out to Elgin every day, and ended up selling the SHO to her sister, who through some other means lost that car. And from then on out, it was just driving the Monte Carlo for about a good solid year on the interstate. It did a really good job while I had it. Only reason I ended up getting rid of that one was when my wife had our second child. It's only a 2-door, and it was a really big pain to get them in and out, especially getting car seats in and out of a 2-door, and we wanted to go to a 4-door. So at the time, I was actually working locally. I wasn't doing the commute anymore, and we only needed 1 car. Like I said, still only 1 person working, so we didn't need 2 cars. Ended up selling the Monte Carlo to my brother and gave it him for next to nothing. And I ended up picking up a 98 Volkswagen Passat 1.8 liter turbo. First turbo car I've ever owned. A little fun car to drive. Practically picked it up only because it was a 4-door, and that was the biggest reason for getting that one. It was a solid little car. I had a couple little problems with it, and I'm not sure what was causing the issues. I didn't have it, I didn't really care too much about the little things it was doing. It was solid, started up every single time, never gave me much of an issue at all. Biggest problem I had was never had a turbo car before, and I was driving it kind of hard, and it lost all power. And I had no idea what the hell happened to it. So I just called up a local guy. He said he was pretty sure he knew what was wrong with it. And I said it was making a really weird chirping sound when I tried to go anywhere, and it just falls on its face. And I thought the turbo was going out. He didn't think it was that bad, so he had me bring it in. And he said, "Yep, you just blew a coupler off." I was like, "Oh, I never had a turbo car prior to that, so I didn't know that was a thing." And because it was such a simple fix, he charged me the cost of the clamp. No shop time or anything. A really cool guy. So that thing lasted. I think we drove that thing for about 3 years. It was a real solid car, and the only reason I got rid of it was when my wife went back to work. I ended up getting the newest car we've ever owned at this time, and the most amount of money I've ever spent on a car at this time. Everything else was like $2,500 or less, every car I've ever bought. But I wanted a newer car that was nicer and was going to last me a while, and I actually still own it to this day, and that's the 2010 Chevy Impala. We got it back in 07. It was only a few years old, and low miles, and it was like 12 grand for that car. And since then, it's been paid off, and I've only had to replace the motor once on it. So, I'm doing pretty good so far. Yeah, so what we ended up doing was I ended up getting the Impala, and it was supposed to be my car, and it ended up becoming my wife's car for reasons, but she had gone back to work, so we needed, 2 cars again. I was still driving the Passat, and after a while, when she got a better job and started making decent money, we wanted 2 nice cars, so we ended up giving the Passat away. We ended up giving the Passat away to her dad, and I went out and bought her. She liked the Volkswagens, and she liked Jettas, and I liked the sound of a diesel. So we all compromised, and I ended up picking up a 2010 Volkswagen Jetta TDI, which, if anybody knows what that is, it's there was a big controversy over that a few years ago during they referred to as Dieselgate, which was where Volkswagen lied about the emission standards and made the car trick itself into thinking it was running within the emission standards because it knew when it was being scanned. And then as soon as it was unplugged from a scanner, it went back to running dirty again, which it didn't bother me at all. If I could get the thing to roll coal, I would have loved that. But that brought us down to just having the Impala and the Jetta as our daily drivers, which is, the Jetta was like another $12,500. I actually got a really good deal on it because it was worth way more than that at the time. But I was able to talk him down on that. And those were both of our daily drivers for quite a while. There was an issue with those common rail diesels that the Jetta was using at the time. And they were known, and we didn't know about this until it actually happened. And my wife's about 2 hours away in middle Wisconsin at a retreat. And she starts heading home and says, oh, the car just lost all power and just falls on its face and now it won't go anywhere. And then I shut it off and now it won't turn back on. So we end up paying, that was like $400 to have it towed back home, to find out that the high pressure fuel pump had completely disintegrated and just put metal through the whole system. So if anybody knows anything about these common rail diesels, you have to have like 20,000 PSI of pressure to open up the injectors. So it sends the fuel up through a fuel pump in the tank to a high pressure pump mounted on the side of the motor, and it builds up tremendous power. It's got a cam lifter design that actually does the pump, and it would turn on its side and then just completely eat the cam up. And I've never heard anything about this before, and it was the first diesel we've ever owned. So I did some research on it. I went out to the car when we got it home. I pulled the top of the fuel pump off, and all I saw was metal shavings for days. So they were quoting something around the neighborhood of $6,000 to $10,000 to repair it, because the entire fuel system had to be replaced, including the 4 injectors, which retailed for about $600 a piece.
That's crazy. That's one thing that I have not owned is a diesel.
Yeah, I mean, they are fun, but God, the repairs can get pricey on those things. But if I would have went like 2 years prior, like an 08, it wouldn't have the common rail diesel, and they were almost bulletproof. They would never die. I think they're called the AHL motor code on those, and they last forever. And a lot of people put them in other cars just because they're just really good motors, and they're cheap to fix and reliable. Unfortunately, that's not what I had.
Yeah, so that's basically a similar story. We're kind of at the same point in our life when I bought my '04 Neon. It was same thing. It was about 3 years old, and it was the newest car I had. And same thing, had kids, had to buy a nice daily. And then speaking of popping couplers, I had a exact same scenario happen when I had the 240 before I had the LS in it. It was a turbo RB20 motor. It was a inline 6 turbo motor. And let me tell you, when you pop a coupler, you think you have no clue what happened, because you have absolutely zero power. I limped the thing home exactly the same way. I had no clue. If I would have known that's all it was, I would have stopped and put it back on, but I had no clue what it was, limped it home. I was sure that I blew something up. I was beating on it pretty good in Mexico.
Yep.
And all it was a coupler, and I know exactly how you felt, because you have absolutely zero power when that happens.
Well, and it's just making the weirdest chirping noise too. You can hear the turbo just making these really, really strange noises, and it's like, what the hell's going on here?
Yep, so what ended up happening with that Jetta then?
So the problem was we'd had it for about a year, and like I said, I paid about $12.50 for it. There was no warranty on it because, of course, it's a diesel, and at the time it had like, I think 150,000 miles, which for a diesel is just getting broken in. Those things should be able to go 3, 4, sometimes 500,000 miles easily. And I owed way too much on it to just junk this thing or get rid of it. I wasn't going to pay $6,000 to $10,000 for the entire fuel system to be replaced on there. And I knew there had to be another way. I knew it had to be something else I could do to fix that. But everywhere I looked, everybody I spoke with, every shop I called said, no, you have to. There's no way. The metal shavings are too fine. You have to replace the whole thing. You can't just clean it. So we garaged it, and I went out and I bought a kind of, I don't want to call it a winter car, because it was more of a, while I fix your car, let's get you another thing to drive. So we ended up getting, and I think it was like a 96, 97, or 98. I can't remember the exact year, because it was just, I didn't care. It was cheap, but it was a Dodge Dakota. So it was a extended cab. So just the 2 doors with the little bench in the back. And it was a solid runner. It had the 318 V8 in there, but it was only rear wheel drive. And when it was snowing out, you really knew that it was only rear wheel drive. I didn't care how much weight I put in the back of that thing. It just spun them. And it was a nice solid little truck. And I think I paid like $1,200 for it. And it just had blown out shocks. So the thing drove like a boat. Like, I bought it from a guy that lived like a quarter mile down the road from me, and it was sketchy driving at home. The thing was in every lane. So it was like another $60 worth of shocks, and the thing was perfect. I did find out that it had rusted gas tank straps on it when it fell off.
While driving?
Yes, sir.
Sounds like another interesting story here.
Oh, yeah. So I was driving home on lunch break, and I heard a pop and a dragging sound. So I pulled over real quick, and I saw that the corner of the tank was about touching the ground. So I was actually closer to my dad's house than I was my house. So I just parked at his house and got someone to come pick me up and went back to work. And then I got out there the next day, and I showed up with a couple ratchet straps, and I made a semi-permanent fix, one of those temporary permanent fixes. So, I mean, it lasted until I got rid of the truck.
Ratchet straps. I'm exactly as you're telling the story, I'm thinking I would have just put a ratchet strap on it.
Oh yeah. I did a quick calculation. I said, what's the weight of gas per gallon? I looked at the weight of the gas per gallon, and then how many gallons the tank could hold. And I said, okay, this is the size, this is the weight restriction of ratchet strap I need. So I went and bought the one that was a little bit bigger than that and threw it on there, just ratcheted it to the bottom of the truck, and just sent it.
You definitely put way more thought into it than I would have.
I was concerned about losing the thing on the Rockford roads. I mean, they're not the best around here. Even the nicest roads around here have huge potholes. So I was kind of trying to over-engineer it so I didn't blow the truck up.
Fair enough. So you've only got a couple vehicles left, right?
Yep. So the Dakota was just a temporary vehicle while I was fixing the Jetta. With the Jetta, I did actually get a hold of some guy on one of the forums for the TDIs, and that was, I think, TDI Club. And there was a guy in Canada who, when everybody was saying you couldn't do it, stopped and said, no, yes, you can. And he was really cool. He owned a company called 2 Micron, and he came up with this 2 Micron filtration system that would preemptively help protect the fuel system if the high power fuel pump did fail. So he was really cool, and he spent a lot of time on the phone with me, calling me, texting me, and walking me through how to fix it. And it was pretty much take everything out, clean it really, really well, wipe it all down, wipe out the tank, ultrasonic clean the high pressure metal lines, replace the rubber lines, and then put his 2 Micron filtration system, which he actually upgraded to a 1 Micron filtration system, but he still called himself 2 Micron for some reason. And once all that was done, all I had to do was replace the injectors, and the thing ran. And I think the whole thing, and the most expensive part was the injectors. I spent like $2,500, and it ran flawlessly. Guy came up with a really cool setup and patented it, and it pretty much, if it ever happened again, the only thing that would get hurt in there would have been the high pressure pump, and it contains all the carnage inside there and the 1 Micron filter. So it was a really cool thing, and it wasn't very expensive. I think I only paid like $500 for his filtration system and the rerouting setup that he built for it, which was all patented. He did a really good job. A lot of R&D went into it, and the guy was really helpful. So he helped me get that thing right back on the road.
That's awesome, and that's really what the car community is about, is those situations where you can call up a complete stranger, help them through their situation. In this case, he was able to sell you something, but still sounds like at a decent price, and you were able to get that car going for a lot less than what it would have cost to have a mechanic do it.
Oh yeah. And the thing is, he gave me all that help prior to me ever even agreeing to buy his product. He was trying to help me get it cleaned up and back on the road, just because he heard all the people saying it can't be done, it can't be done. And he said, no, that's not right. It can be done. And that's why he was willing to invest a lot of time to help me get it done. He had an entire PDF document that had the entire write-up of everything I needed to do and every step I needed to do it. He sent that to me first, and then he also texted me and called me and walked me through everything of making sure that I didn't miss anything, because they weren't wrong. The metal shavings were absolutely microscopic and will completely clog the injector heads. And $600 a piece, those injectors are not cheap to have to destroy them like that. So he was very detailed process of going through and cleaning all that up. And I mean, I had to garage the car for a few months. I think it was 3 months that we had the Dakota as the temporary vehicle for that. And once I got the Jetta back up and running, we went ahead and I ended up giving the Dakota to my niece because she was watching our kids, free babysitter at the time. So I just gave her a truck. And I think that thing lasted her a couple months before she wrapped it around a tree. But she was safe, so it was a really solid truck.
So how long did you end up driving the Jetta after you did that fix?
We had the Jetta for at least, believe 3 years after that. Or maybe 2 or 3 years after that, because it was while we were living in our old house, and it was shortly after we fixed that, maybe a year after we fixed that, we ended up moving into this neighborhood. She had that for about, I think, a year after we moved in here, a year and a half maybe. So yeah, it had been a couple of years, almost 3 years. And that one suffered its sad fate at the hands of a Ford Explorer that tried to make a left-hand turn from the center lane of a one-way through her. So big testament to Volkswagen. They are really, really tough cars, because had it not cracked the front rim after she drove over the guy's car, I think she did more damage to the Explorer. It was like a 96 Explorer, and so it was one of those really, really tough ones, the solid boats. And she just drove through him at about 40 miles an hour, and had it not broken that rim, the thing probably would have drove off.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, my biggest regret with that one is I really wanted to buy it back from the salvage yard afterwards. But in Illinois, we have this fun little law that says if anything's less than 10 years old, you cannot buy it back unless you have a dealer license, because it's supposed to stop cars from being kind of like thrown back together after an accident and unsafely sold and put back on the roads. So they would not allow me to rebuy the car back. If it was 6 months older, I could have, but it was within that time frame. They would not let me buy it back.
Yep, the joys of living in Illinois.
Yeah, we have just the best restrictions.
So that puts you up to your current vehicles, right?
Yep. So I still have the Impala, as I said. So she needed a new daily driver, and she'd really worked to get where she is right now. And she always wanted a nice big truck. So I decided that I was going to take the settlement from the Jetta and get her the truck that she's always wanted. So we got her a 2015 Ram 1500. And that is the largest single purchase other than a house I've ever made in my life. And even though I got a screaming deal on it, and that was, I think they wanted like almost $26,000 for that truck when I walked in there, and that was just the list price. When I walked out of there, I paid $23,500 out the door, tax, title, and license, and still the biggest purchase other than a house I've ever made in my whole life. That truck better last her the rest of her life.
Yeah, your expensive vehicle and my expensive vehicles, both pickups, completely different prices.
Yeah, by an entire digit too.
Yeah, easily.
But then that brings me to my very last vehicle. So this is just my third vehicle that I own. So that's the 99 BMW E36 convertible that has been LS swapped and then twin turbo swapped.
Yep, and we've got a video coming soon on that. We've taken it out for a little bit of
test and tune?
Yeah, that's actually the words I was going to use, but I wasn't thinking of that. But yeah, we took it around the neighborhood a little bit.
We took it around Mexico a little bit.
We took it around Mexico a little bit and got some data for it. So we'll have a video coming soon for that.
Yep.
And then I've had 4 motorcycles. So we talked about the Katana, we talked about the Ninja 250. I did start building a hardtail bobber out of like a 70 something Kawasaki. I can't remember the exact model.
KZ?
I think it was actually.
That was my first motorcycle. I built it out of 2 crappy motorcycles.
I wish I would have kept it, but I get bored easily with vehicles, so I did end up selling it, and the guy ended up finishing it and send me pictures, which was pretty cool, but it did suck to see it. It turned out very nice. And then the last motorcycle is the one that I currently have, which is an '04 Harley Sportster 1200 XL.
Yeah, for motorcycles, like I said, I had actually 2 78 KZ 650 Kawasaki's, and those were actually a wedding present when I got married. And they were both complete, like absolutely trashed salvage bikes, essentially, fully rusted out, fully dry rotted. None of them ran, and I took both of them and stripped them down and built one running bike out of it. It was really nice looking when it was all done, and even the guy that got them for me, who has his own motorcycle shop and ended up taking them on trade, said that he never expected them to ever look that nice and was actually really impressed on how they came out. And that, at the time, I've never ridden a motorcycle before, and it was my first bike to ride, and essentially that's all it was. I learned how to ride on it. I got my license on it. I rode it for about a year, and then I went ahead and sold it when I bought my first real actual newer bike that, had a real actual push button starter rather than having to kickstart this thing. So that was a 98 Honda CBR 900RR, which was insanely fast. And I should have never bought that bike because holy crap, that thing almost killed me multiple times. And I did some really stupid stuff on the streets of Mexico that included triple digits. And I think the 0 to 60 on the thing was 3 seconds, 0 to 106. It was insanely fast, but it was a really fun bike, and I really miss it to this day.
And you still have a motorcycle today, right?
Yep, that's my 2007 Honda VTX 1300, which is my daily rider, I'd say. I've had that one for about 5 years, I think now, and it's just a nice, smooth cruiser, and I really love the way it looks, all blacked out, black and chrome.
So we haven't posted a lot about our bikes, but we both do have bikes, and we have gone on a few rides together. Our wives definitely like these bikes better. They're more comfortable for them. So we just went through all of our cars. What would you consider your favorite vehicle out of all those?
Well, that's an unfair question because, one of my favorite cars was always the Dodge Daytona, and I don't know why. It will always kind of be one of my favorite. Even if you have asked my wife, it's one of her favorites because that was the car I had when we met, and that's the car she learned to drive in, and she really liked it too. But it's like trying to compare that with the BMW, which is just a blast to drive, and I like it for different reasons. I love the BMW because I built it. I built it from nothing but a shell, the engine, everything. And, I got blood, sweat, and tears, physical blood on parts of the car, actually, on parts of the exhaust. That will stay on there forever. But the Daytona was just one of my favorite cars just because how it was, at the time, it was a really fun car for me. And it's just something that I really grew on. It's something that really grew on me, and I love that car. So, they both rank the same for different reasons.
I think that's fair because I think it's hard to not consider the vehicle that you currently have as one of your favorites. So, talking previously owned vehicles, I think for you, then I would say the Daytona.
Yep, definitely.
For me, it would be a hard decision as well, but it would be between the Honda Civic that I bought right while I was in high school or that Silverado that was the most expensive. Kind of the same thing. I liked them both for different reasons. I liked the truck because it was my first truck. It was extremely nice, but it was only a single cab, which is why I ended up having to sell it when we started having kids. There was no room. But if we're talking previous cars, not including the Fox body and the 240 that I have now, I still to this day think the Civic that I had was probably my favorite just because again, same story as you. I met my wife with that car, and it was really the first car that I ever started modifying. Now, with the very first Mustang I had, I was 13. I kind of built that car, but I replaced parts. With the Civic, I was actually modifying things. Never did anything engine related with it. It was all like visual type stuff, but still, that's what got me into modifying cars. So I'd have to say that is my favorite. Well, we've been rambling for quite a while now, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this talk about the different vehicles that we owned. Gets you guys a chance to get to know us a little more, know about our past and the stuff that we've done to get us where we are today. Appreciate you guys listening. Make sure you go check us out on all of our social media platforms, 815 LSx Swaps on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. If you have any questions, topics for the show, or want to be a guest, email 815lsxswaps@gmail.com. Whatever platform you are listening to this podcast on, make sure that you follow or subscribe, and that way you get notifications when we upload new podcasts. All right, guys, that's it. We will see you on the next upload.